Hello, this is Dave Lubach. I'm executive editor for the facilities market of the Trade Press Media Group. Thank you for joining today's webcast, Fire Safety Insights, Navigating Codes and Innovations for Your Facility. Thanks to our sponsor, Signs Building Solutions, for helping make today's webcast possible. Our presenter today is Larry Reitz. Larry is Vice President and Service Line Leader for Fire Detection and Alarm for Jensen Hughes. He works as a designer, instructor, author, and industry advocate. He is a NICET Level 4 certified fire alarm designer and certified fire protection specialist with over 28 years of life safety industry experience. He serves on multiple NFPA and UL technical committees. Today's webcast learning objectives include learning the difference between a code and a standard and catching up on some of the latest important code changes, discovering 6 new technologies that are being used in fire alarm and fire sprinkler industries, and understanding some life safety best practices for the installation and maintenance of systems and equipment. But before we get started with today's event, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. We do encourage audience questions throughout the webcast. To submit questions, please navigate to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions at any time. At the conclusion of today's webcast, you will also receive a link to a brief online assessment. Upon successful completion of this assessment, you will receive your CEU certificate. Today's webcast will also be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcast. Now, I'll pass it over to Larry.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be with you and the whole FacilitiesNet family. It's nice to be with you today. I hope you're doing well wherever you are. As Dave mentioned, we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic today. We're going to be really talking about the proper installation and maintenance of fire alarm and other life safety systems, because that becomes key to really critical to the life safety of our building occupants, which ultimately all of us are responsible for and want to take most seriously. So like Dave mentioned, my name is Larry Reitz. I do need to mention at the start of this, I do serve on several NFPA technical committees, and as such, I want to make it clear that my presentation today is my own opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of NFPA or any other entity. And we're also going to see some exciting technology products today. I also am not speaking on behalf of those products. It's not an endorsement, merely showing you some of the things that are out there available in the industry today that you may be able to take advantage of in your pursuit for life safety. So we already kind of covered those learning objectives that Dave highlighted. Let's get right into our presentation today on navigating codes and some of the technological innovations for your facility. Now, we're going to start today by talking about codes and standards, because you kind of can't talk about technology. You can't talk about keeping a building or an occupant of a building safe without having some touchstone, some way to refer back to codes and standards. So we're going to talk about codes and standards, what's the difference, and what some of the newer requirements that are happening in the code industry that might affect your facility or your occupancy. Well, let's start with that. What is the difference between a code and a standard? Sometimes we use those terms interchangeably, but really when it comes to they are really separate and distinct things. So first, when we think about a code, really what most people mean when they use that term code, they're talking model building codes. And here in the United States, the vast majority of states, approximately 38, along with the District of Columbia, have adopted some version of the International Code Council series of codes, that being the International Building Code, International Fire Code, International Mechanical Code, and whatnot. The remaining 12 or so states have adopted NFPA 1 or NFPA 101 or both, and many states have their own building and fire code that either supersede, amend, or work in conjunction with those ICC or NFPA model codes. And this really gives us the whole gambit of building codes, everything from plumbing systems to mechanical systems, and of course, life safety systems and the physical construction and egress from the building. Now, for the majority of states that adopt the International Building Code for new buildings, there's a large variety in the adoption of what editions of that code. Now, most of them are on 2015 or newer codes, so 2015, 2018, 2021, and about 50% or so of the states right now, maybe a little bit more than that, are on either the 2018 or 2021 versions of those ICC codes. As an example, California, a very large state, they moved to the 2021 IBC in January of 2023. So we see movement of some of these larger states to some of the later codes. Now, that's what we refer to when we talk about codes. Codes really tell us when and where we have to install life safety equipment, particularly a fire alarm system or even a fire alarm device. But it's a little different when it comes to a standard. A standard is really referring to the installation of a required item from the code. So those installation standards are things that we're very used to hearing about. NFPA 72, that's the National Fire Alarm and Signaling Code. NFPA 70, that's the National Electric Code. NFPA 13, the Sprinkler Code. 90A for air conditioning and ventilating systems, etc. And these are really installation codes that tell us how to install, let's say, a fire alarm or life safety system itself, or a device that's part of that system. So that's really the big difference between a code and a standard. Code is when and where we need to install a piece of equipment or do it in a certain way. And then the standard is really how to install that installation side of it. And we have to use both of these together, right? One drives us to the other, but they work in concert with each other. So how do you know what code or standard applies in your situation? Well, you have to do research within your own state and your own local jurisdiction. Some model codes, some codes and standards are regulated at the state level, some at a local jurisdiction, let's say a county or even a city. And so you have to do some research to really understand what applies to your situation. Now, for new construction and alteration, the International Code Council and NFPA codes are updated every 3 years, but they're not necessarily adopted with that same frequency in your local jurisdiction. But there's always going to be a lag between the code and the standard as it applies. Let's give you an example of that. So if you were on the 2018 edition of the International Building Code, really that code references the 2016 edition of NFPA 72. So that's the lag that we have with the model building code kind of being in the lead by, let's say, 2 or sometimes 3 years over the installation standard that it references. Now, that's the normal situation. Sometimes a local jurisdiction will say, I want the most up-to-date installation standard. So maybe even though they're still on the 2018 IBC, maybe they're on the 2019 NFPA 72, or even the 2022 edition. So again, this is where you have to do your research of what applies to your state and your local jurisdiction. And most authorities having jurisdiction will help you in your search, and there's a lot of online resources to make that happen. Now, since all codes and standards are always being adopted, how do we keep track of all this? Well, there is something we need to know, because really we said this applies to new construction or alteration, like a tenant finish and whatnot. But for inspection and maintenance, it's the latest adopted code in your jurisdiction. And that's important to note, because as soon as an installation standard like NFPA 72 is adopted in your jurisdiction, that becomes the rules for inspection, testing, and maintenance that you need to follow. So it's important to keep those kinds of things in mind. Well, what are a couple of examples of code updates? We know we've got these cycles of codes. The codes are kind of constantly evolving and changing. Let's look at a couple of examples that may or may not affect your specific building, but maybe it's good information. You'll learn how some of these code changes come about. Now, when we look at the International Building Code, International Fire Code, an E occupancy is an educational occupancy. It's used for the education for 6 or more persons for education from anything from the 0 to the 12th grade. So we're talking about our primary K through 12 kind of schools. Now, as of 2015, these facilities are required to have a manual fire alarm system with an EVAX voice system throughout. EVAX stands for Emergency Voice Alarm Communication System, and it means a voice fire alarm system if we have more than 100 occupants in the building, which is actually a pretty small school if you think about it. Now, it includes daycares within places of worship and K through 12 schools as well. Now, many of us remember growing up in older K through 12 schools. We had horns, maybe or bells. Sometimes we had strobes if they were newer, but really no longer. A manual fire alarm system is required, but with voice capability. But we do have some exceptions that we can remove pull stations under certain conditions. Well, if we remove pull stations from our elementary schools, as an example, or our K through 12 schools, there's a whole lot of other equipment we need to add. For instance, we need smoke detectors in interior corridors. We have to have auditoriums, cafeterias, gymnasiums, and similar areas protected by heat detectors or other approved detection devices. We need the shops and laboratories involving dust and vapors to be protected by heat detectors. And that makes sense because errors can lead to life safety situations in those shops and laboratories. And we need a building that's equipped with an approved fire sprinkler system, which many of our educational occupancies didn't have in years past. That sprinkler system needs to activate the voice fire alarm system on any kind of sprinkler water flow. So we see some of this progress to be able to communicate with, in this case, students and occupants of a K through 12 facility. Now, let's talk about a really important topic, and that's carbon monoxide. Now, as of right now, there are no federal regulations when it comes to carbon monoxide regulations. Um, as such, these regulations vary from state to state, and this is kind of a high-level view of some of those requirements. Now, carbon monoxide is very dangerous. It's colorless, it's odorless, it's completely non-perceptible, but it's lethal at the right level. So in our homes, we have about 46 states plus the District of Columbia that have some level of carbon monoxide alarm legislation, with 4 states that currently are exceptions, although some of those states are considering legislation as we speak. Apartments are mostly regulated in the US with a few exceptions. Hotels and dormitories, again, mostly requiring some form of carbon monoxide detection. And then we can kind of see some of the other occupancies. This might be one of your occupancies that are out there: nursing homes, schools, daycares, and even assembly occupancies requiring carbon monoxide detection. Now, this is very important, especially in, for instance, daycares. Children are especially vulnerable to the effects of carbon monoxide because of their smaller body frame. They also process carbon monoxide differently than adults do. They may be more severely affected by that, and they show signs of carbon monoxide poisoning much earlier. So if you have occupancies involving children or the elderly, make sure you're reviewing your carbon monoxide requirements for your locality and really going above and beyond when it comes to providing this kind of detection. Now, when we look at the model building codes in the 2018 edition of the International Fire Code, for instance, there were requirements for almost all types or a lot of types of occupancies when it came to carbon monoxide. So anytime you see the yes there, you're seeing new or existing buildings requiring certain forms of carbon monoxide detection. Now, if we compare that to the 2021 edition, you see we're seeing existing Group E occupancies being added to that list. And when we go to the 2024 edition of NFPA, or the International Fire Code, we see even more requirements for carbon monoxide. So keep this topic in the front of your mind. Think about your own home, having carbon monoxide protection anytime you have fossil fuel burning equipment in your home or in your facility. That includes water heaters, furnaces, any kind of fossil fuel burning appliance, whether it's permanently installed or not. Now, let's look at some of the installation changes that have been made kind of in that same 2018 to 2024 time period that might be interesting to you as a facility manager. The first one actually deals with documentation and what kind of documentation you keep at your local facility for your fire alarm system. So, as of the 2013 edition, we had record documentation cabinets required for all fire alarm systems. So it actually says that all record documentation shall be stored in a documentation cabinet and that no record documentation be stored in the control unit. Now, you'll probably, if you go to your facility, maybe even today, and you open up that fire panel, you'll probably see papers and all kinds of things stuffed in that. Well, that's actually against the installation standard of NFPA 72. All of that material, there should be no paper, no storage inside a fire alarm control unit whatsoever. Rather, a documentation cabinet should be stored or be provided adjacent to that control unit that contains all the paper or electronic documents that maybe technicians used to store inside that fire alarm control unit. And the nice thing with these documentation cabinets, like you see on the screen here, is most of them have a hard drive, a little built-in USB drive that can be used to store electronic documents, things like inspection reports, impairment reports, deficiency reports, basically the system programming, the as-built drawings, everything can be stored electronically, and it's sitting right with the fire alarm control unit, and everybody knows where that material is. But we never want to store that paper documentation within the fire alarm control unit. In 2016, we had an item that was added in Chapter 10 that talked about the circuit disconnecting means of a fire alarm system. And it requires it to be permanently identified as to its purpose and marked as a fire alarm system. So you see a picture of a good example of this kind of documentation inside. Most fire alarm systems are protected by a circuit breaker on the primary power. So having these kinds of words listed, making it very clear where the circuit breaker for our fire alarm systems are, identifying it as to what kind of system. In 2019, the labeling moved to Annex A material as suggestions, but you get the idea to make sure we understand that where our circuit breakers are for our fire alarm panel. And this is also a National Electric Code requirement, so NFPA 70 also applies to our information here. Now, inside emergency control, which is Chapter 21, we had a significant change in the 2019 edition of NFPA 72, where all of these sections in NFPA 72 regarding elevators were updated to be consistent with ASME A17.1. Now, A17.1 is the safety code for elevators and escalators, specifically new elevators and escalators. And so all of these sections were reviewed by committees that kind of looked at NFPA 13 and NFPA 72 and A17.1, and they kind of came together and really solidified our interfaces with our elevator. So whether it's phase 1 emergency recall operation, whether we're shutting down the power for our elevators, all of that has been updated as of the 2019 edition, and we've seen it fairly consistently since then in NFPA 72. And that also applies if you have larger buildings. If you have buildings over 120 feet in height, if you do have that, you have fire service access elevators that are used by the fire service, and that has some additional requirements that are applied into that. So as we look at interfacing with other building equipment like elevators, we see our installation standards have tried to be more comprehensive and cover more of that proper interface so that all the codes are speaking kind of the same language. Now, that also comes to our elevator hoistways. Now, elevator hoistways obviously are containing an elevator cab that's moving up and down. Occasionally, based on the codes, we have to place fire detection devices within our hoistway. Now, if that's true, as of the 2019 edition of NFPA 72, we had this requirement in 21.3.7 that if devices are inside the hoistway, they need to be accessible for service, testing, and maintenance from outside the hoistway. Now, this is done for a very, very pure reason. It's to keep our elevator inspectors safe. Not only the elevator inspectors, but the fire alarm technicians and inspectors that are working on that interface equipment. Elevator hoistways can be dangerous places. There are injuries that happen every year in elevator hoistways. So this is really an effort to try to keep as many people as possible out of that hoistway and be able to um, work on this equipment from outside the hoistway rather than, let's say, being inside the hoistway, either underneath or on top of an elevator car, which of course can move. Now, here's some examples of how to do that. Might be scratching your head. Well, how do I service or test something that's inside a hoistway from the outside? Well, one example is just using an access door, like you see with this device. It contains basically a cage that sits within the hoistway. You have a rated access door. The equipment, like a smoke detector or heat detector, might be inside this cage. You can access it from outside the hoistway while maintaining the rating of the wall of the hoistway, and it becomes a nice way to test that device, make sure it works without actually entering the hoistway. Another example might be using an air sampling or a linear heat detection system that where the detector is really located outside the hoistway. The piping goes inside the hoistway, and so there's nothing to service inside the hoistway. We simply can test the unit from outside that hoistway if it's properly installed. That might be another very nice way of doing that, providing the protection necessary, but also protecting the inspector. And linear heat detection, as I said, with the connection points outside the hoistway, so we can still do the testing and keeping our inspectors safe outside the hoistway. Now, a couple of things have been made, some significant changes to our smoke detection over the last few years. Now, really, all smoke detectors and smoke alarms are listed to Underwriter Laboratory or ANSI standards, specifically UL 268 and 217. 217 is for smoke alarms. Those are our single station alarms that you might have in your own home, as an example. And then UL 268 is for smoke detectors that are connected to a fire alarm control unit. Well, we want to make these the most reliable smoke detectors we can. And in doing so, we have to realize the situations, the things that we build with have changed. So these two standards have changed in three specific ways. There's been three tests that have been added to help make these items more robust, more trustworthy. The first was adding a flaming polyurethane foam test. We'll see an example of that in a minute. And related to that is a smoldering polyurethane foam test. Now, we use polyurethane everywhere in all of our construction materials. It's in our chairs, our couches, our carpets. Basically, all of our building materials have some kind of polyurethane foam or polyurethane component to it. So we wanted to make sure we were providing smoke detection that would alarm when exposed to this kind of smoke or either flaming or smoldering. And then the third test was a cooking nuisance test that was added because we don't want our smoke alarms or our smoke detectors to be overly sensitive to nuisance materials, particularly cooking nuisance material. So 3 tests were added, and you kind of get a picture of these. That nuisance alarm test is now known as the hamburger test. They take frozen hamburger, they broil it inside the test chamber. It comes out of these little briquettes, and basically they have to be able to survive and not alarm to the nuisance alarm created by a burning hamburger, as an example. But they do have to alarm when exposed to polyurethane foam. In this case, the flaming test. This is some pictures of what that flaming test looks like, taking foam and literally lighting it on fire and making sure our smoke alarms and smoke detectors are activating under that kind of alarm material. Similar with the smoldering test, this is a smoldering polyurethane foam. It produces a different color, different type of smoke. Here you see some pictures from the actual test chamber. And we do want our detectors to alarm when it comes to this. So really the whole breadth of the smoke detector market has been updated to make sure it's not overly sensitive to nuisance alarms, but it is reacting properly to the construction materials that we're making today or using today. In addition, there's some work that was done on batteries. Now, almost all fire alarm control units in everywhere are provided with secondary power through the use of batteries, usually sealed lead acid batteries or something very similar. Um, Added in 2022 was an increase in the battery safety factor because we know batteries age over time. We want them to be able to be used over their lifespan, which is usually 4 to 5 years if it's a good, reliable battery. So our battery safety factor in our calculations has increased from 20 to 25% in the 2022 edition to give us, again, some additional cushion in an operating range of our batteries. Also, effective January 1st, 2024, any battery we use as a secondary power supply for a control unit, notification appliance power supply, and those kinds of things, it must be listed. In this case, listed to like UL in 1989 or 2054, some kind of commercial listing for that guarantees the quality of the battery. And there's many manufacturers that are producing good batteries out there. We want to use those good quality batteries and not use off-market or refurbished batteries. That's not the kind of battery we want to be using in our fire alarm systems. Okay, so hopefully that shows you kind of the breadth, just some of the highlights of how codes and standards have changed just in the last few years, and all of it with a focus on becoming a better quality equipment and a better response to the types of fires that we see in the world today. Our second section, we're going to talk about technology and new technologies, particularly what kind of products and next generation technologies are on display even today and might be available and helpful to you. Now, the first thing we note is the large increase in the use of remote access and how that relates to cybersecurity rules. Now, starting really with, I think, the 2022 edition of NFPA 72, mostly because of what we learned through the process of COVID, there were some real steps forward to increasing our ability to remotely access our fire alarm control units and our fire alarm systems. Now, many organizations are doing some form of remote accessing of fire alarm systems, whether that's installation or modifications to site-specific hardware or firmware, software, even doing remote testing, doing diagnostics, maybe seeing what's wrong with the system before you respond to a site. There's all kinds of challenges, right, when it comes to fire alarm system installation, maintenance, and testing. Vendors may have inadequate staffing. There may be the physical distance between a vendor's shop and a protected premise. Travel costs, just travel time. Some large large cities, Atlanta, New York, San Francisco, other very large congested cities. It can take a very long time to get to a client site. And so remote devices include things like laptop computers, right? Cellular handheld devices, cloud-based systems, applications, all kinds of similar equipment and software is being provided in today's world. Now, some requirements have been added to the code, specifically in Chapter 23, if we're using remote access for testing and maintenance activities, performing remote diagnostics, and for updating any kind of software. Now, the rules, there's a few rules that go along with this, including manually terminating the remote access at the remote device and at the fire alarm control unit. The access must be terminated after 1 hour of inactivity, so someone's not keeping a system connected for long periods of time. You need qualified personnel on site to activate software via a password. And if the software is changed remotely, the testing requirements of NFPA 72 remain the same. So there are a lot of rules around this, but wanted to point it out because a lot of vendors, a lot of individuals are using this. A lot of fire alarm control manufacturers are highlighting their remote access capabilities, but there are some rules around that, and a facility director will want to be aware of what some of those rules are in Chapter 23. Now, once we connect our fire alarm control units to some sort of remote access, like the internet, we open ourselves up to cybersecurity requirements. Now, why should we worry about fire alarm systems? Well, fire alarm systems are electronic devices, right? They're computers. So we have a laptop computer that we connect to a fire alarm control unit, and we program it with that laptop. Well, what can happen to laptops, right? Well, we can get malware on a laptop, and that malware can be spread to a fire alarm control unit. In addition, once our systems are connected to the internet or available through remote access, it allows a pathway for attack. Now, those attacks could be based on some kind of financial reward. It could be identity theft. It could be espionage. It could be a disgruntled employee, even thrill-seeking by some individuals, thinking maybe it's kind of funny to be able to set off a fire alarm system from around the world or a remote location. All of those concerns now are built into NFPA 72 under the cybersecurity rules. The cybersecurity rules in the 2022 edition of NFPA 72 are very brief. It comes with a lot of recommendations. But in the 2025 edition of NFPA 72, which just hit the street, and some jurisdictions will be accepting that as early as January 1st, 2025, has a litany of rules in Chapter 11, which is now the cybersecurity chapter. So wanted you to be aware that this is all very new to the fire alarm industry, but anytime we have our fire alarm systems connected to anything remote, then cybersecurity is going to become front and center, something we have to consider for the safety of our fire systems. Well, we said we'd feature some new technology, so let's do that now. We're going to look at 6 new technologies that have come to the fire alarm industry over the last few years. Now, this is not all the technology advancements we've seen. I just happen to pick these 6. I think they're neat. I think it provides a platform that might be interesting to you as a facility manager, but might give you some options when you're thinking about what kind of challenges you're facing in your facility. Now, in no particular order, I'm going to give you these technological advancements. And the first is self-testing notification appliances. Now, maybe you've always thought of a day where notification appliances could functionally test themselves. Wouldn't that be amazing? Well, now that technology is here. The technology is available from Simplex and AutoCall, those two product lines brought from the Johnson Controls organization. This applies to strobes, horns, and even loudspeakers by providing addressable notification. And so whether you're using xenon strobes, kind of a little bit older technology, or newer LED strobes, it doesn't matter the technology there. Each device is individually addressable. And they actually use a regulated voltage of 29 volts. So as the voltage goes higher, the current goes lower. So we have quite a bit lower current draw. We have the ability to put more devices on a given circuit. And for the first time, you can T-tap a circuit if that's allowed in your jurisdiction, because all of the devices are supervised, are fully monitored for integrity. And the real benefit is the testing part of it, right? So you can do all kinds of automatic or scheduled device test capability. So you can simply do it in an automatic fashion where you press a button and they all test themselves and you get a report of which ones did not function. You could do it on a scheduled basis, like in the middle of the night when it's very low occupancy, to do your self-testing. And again, getting a report in the morning of all the devices that maybe didn't pass. Or you can actually do it manually. You can do each one individually, put the panel in a test mode, use a magnet on each device, and it'll test each device individually. So really, really neat technology that's been applied to the notification appliance market. Well, also a notification appliance advantage in technology is available from the Edwards and Kitty family of notification appliances. They also have worked on their notification appliances, but from a little different aspect. Now they have this Genesis LED series that uses a single current draw for everything from 15 up to 115 candela strobes. So really the breadth of the majority of candela strobes that we use out there, having a single low current draw. Really nearly neat technology. Often we spend a lot of time saying, well, do we have enough power to add one more device? Do we have it needs to be a 110. That takes a lot of power. Do we have power on a circuit to do that? Well, this really simplifies things by everything having a single current draw and having a very low profile design. Additionally, they've built in some high fidelity performance for loudspeakers. We know historically fire alarm loudspeakers have not been good quality, but some technology advancements have been done to that loudspeaker market to make it even more quality than before. And self-testing smoke detectors. Have you ever got tired of going to each smoke detector with maybe a smoke pole or a smoke can? You ever want that smoke detector to test itself? Well, this is available from Notifier fire alarm systems. Each device introduces a small amount of smoke and also heat into the chamber to test the sensor's capability. It automatically tests if the smoke entry ports are blocked by, let's say, a dust cover on it. So that's convenient. And it verifies that the technician has completed the visual aspect through kind of a built-in beacon and a self-testing app that a technician can carry around on their phone. You can do multiple tests simultaneously, and it's all to the latest editions of those UL 268 codes that I was referring to earlier. So really, really neat technology, which could be really, really beneficial in some occupancies and really cut down on the distraction for the annual testing of smoke detectors. Now, the next three technologies really involve the fire sprinkler industry, specifically as how we interface between fire sprinkler and fire alarm, which is very, very common in almost all of the buildings you're responsible for. The first is available from Potter Global Technologies. This is the solenoid coil keeper. So NFPA 13 requires that if we have a solenoid that's controlled by a fire alarm system, for instance, for a pre-action sprinkler system or a deluge sprinkler system, where the fire alarm is releasing the valves, they do it through a solenoid. Well, it's now required by NFPA 13 that that solenoid is monitored. And so we know if that solenoid is actually on the releasing valve, actually on the device that does it. So if that solenoid is removed from that piston or from that actuator, it illuminates an audible and visual alarm. And we know that that system is no longer capable of doing its releasing. This is very, very important, and because a lot of pre-action and deluge systems can be easily disabled, and if they're not put back in service after an annual test, we're defeating the whole purpose of our fire sprinkler system. A second technology is an auto test flow switch. We know the proper way to test a water flow switch is with the flow of water. Well, there's a new product out that remotely tests without flowing that water. It's UL listed, FM approved for 2 to 8 inch pipe. This can be a really neat way to be able to test the accuracy of your flow switch without ever wasting water or dumping water. Very, very handy for fire alarm technicians to be able to do this test without affecting or dumping water in a facility. So really, really neat technology. And it confirms the alarm activation for the set retard period. So if we have, let's say, a 45-second delay on our water flow, it's going to test and we can measure exactly what that retard time frame is. So very, very nice for AHJs and inspection, testing, and maintenance folks to be able to test that ability. And finally, also available from Potter is a technology for exterior pieces of fire sprinkler equipment, particularly like an exterior post indicator valve known as a PIV, like you see in the bottom picture there. Often these PIVs are located outside of the facility, maybe on the corner or out in the outside the facility. We need to monitor these devices, but the only way to do it previously was to trench a wiring back underneath, let's say, the sidewalk or the parking lot and get it back into the building. Well, now there's a wireless option here, a wireless supervisory system. We can monitor any dry contact whatsoever, including tamper, flow switches, PIV valves through this bridge. It has clear line of sight of about 800 feet, so that'll go quite a ways. It is UL 864 listed, and it's using a wireless format in the 2.4 gigahertz range. And the nice thing, it's compatible with any fire alarm system. So even if we have a wired route today, maybe that wired route becomes compromised by water, we need to replace that. Well, we can do that, and it can be very, very effective way to fix older systems. All right. Well, let's finish up with our third section. Well, actually, I got a quick fourth section as well. But let's talk about some fire alarm best practices very quickly. Now, really, there's 4 fire alarm best practices I wanted to highlight, and that's design, equipment, installation, and our inspection and maintenance. And this may at different times as a facility manager apply to you in different ways. So I wanted to kind of go through that life cycle or that process of a fire alarm control unit. Now, first, system design, especially a replacement fire alarm design, or maybe a moves, adds, and changes, a tenant finish in your facility. The design is a critical best practice step to operational reliability that simply cannot be overlooked. A proper fire alarm design is critical, and often fire alarm systems are designed by individuals who don't have the appropriate fire protection background to perform the design competently. The designer needs to understand that applicable codes and standards are really just minimum criteria and to provide only the minimum baseline from which to expand. If you use third-party designers who agree to design the system, they need to make sure that they are qualified. Make sure that they've considered the big picture. Have they considered all the other equipment in the building that needs to be noted? And you'll want to check their credentials in that. What systems or equipment within the building may need to be interfaced with now or in the future that could be designed into the system now? Because you have to be able to address critical interconnected emergency control equipment, wiring to fans, dampers, smoke control equipment, elevators, and the like. And what advantages will a voice fire alarm system provide for you, and what design changes are required to make that happen so that we can communicate with people rather than just activating a bell or a horn, which really doesn't tell anyone anything. Second, we want to select quality equipment. It's really the foundation that sets us up for success. Not just what will work, but something that can be maintained for the long term. Now, the amount of quality fire alarm control equipment on the market has increased in recent years. Many manufacturers have added networking, voice, other options to their product line. This allows for competitive pricing. So there's a big market out there to compare from. And you can, again, look at some of those various strengths and weaknesses of manufacturers. And again, getting the assistance of some kind of industry professional to help you with that can be very advantageous. And just like we talked about today, what new technologies exist to improve that system performance? What really is important to you, and how can you take advantage of those technological improvements? Now, when it comes to installation, there's much to consider. Does the company have the installation skills for maybe a large fire alarm installation, or would they only be able to do a very small replacement or upgrade? Or if you're using an electrical contractor, do they have that low voltage fire alarm specific techniques available on their staff? Remember, even a parts and smarts, right? Having the programming and having the devices needs to include some kind of acceptance testing and make sure all the equipment works together. It's really the best situations where a design meets the installation, where it meets the programming, and those three individuals work really well together to give you the best possible installation. And then finally, the ultimate success of a new or replacement fire alarm system is measured in years later in the long-term reliability and operational effectiveness of the new system. So will your system require a significant amount of inspection, testing, and maintenance? Or does your technology allow it to test itself, like we talked about in today's presentation? Can system additions or modifications be easily made? Is there capacity to make those? Or has the system been designed so tight that there's no room for growth? And establishing a testing and maintenance plan will ensure that the facilities maintenance program can receive management's commitment to really give the lifespan that this fire alarm system or fire sprinkler system really needs. Because if we can increase that lifespan, we're going to increase our return on investment. Now, before I go, I want to highlight two other life safety systems that you might be affected by as a facility manager. The first is an emergency responder communication enhancement system, known as an ERC system. That's the official name of it. It's commonly known as a bidirectional amplifier, or maybe a distributed antenna system, or even an auxiliary radio communication system, or ARCS, if you're in New York City. The increasing requirements really since the 2015 code have increased. We see requirements for ERC systems in a lot more buildings today. These systems allow our emergency responders, police, fire, and paramedics primarily to use their radios within your facility with clarity. And that becomes very important for their health, their safety, and the safety of your occupants. Now, there's many local requirements, many of them retroactive, like in the state of Florida and other locations. Excuse me. As a result of shooting events that we've had, and other types of events. And these systems were inside NFPA 72, but in the 2016 edition of NFPA 72, they were taken out, moved into NFPA 1221, and as of 2022, NFPA 1221 was folded into NFPA 1225. So if you're interested in learning more about ERCs, I would encourage you to contact the Safer Buildings Coalition. That's saferbuildings.org. They can give you a ton of information on these ERC systems. So if you need more information, look to that resource, a very, very good resource. And finally, two-way emergency communication systems for rescue assistance. Now, these have had a lot of names over the years: area of refuge systems, area of rescue assistance systems. It's closely related to stairway, elevator landing, and elevator lobby communication systems. These used to be nothing but very, very simple paging systems, often using old phone technology, but really they've come of age. Now, as of 2022, all systems must be listed to UL 2525. All systems must have secondary power. That's 24 hours of standby and 4 hours of full use. Very, very similar to a fire alarm system. The power supplies must be monitored. And there's some other requirements, particularly when it comes to wiring. As of today, in today's world, as of the 2024 IBC, the systems will need to be UL 2525 listed, and the installation will be per NFPA 72. So just wanted to show that these systems aren't so, let's say, rinky-dinky as they were in the past, but much more robust, using a lot of monitoring and supervision, because when we press that button, or when someone presses that button in an area of refuge, they want to know that their message is going to get out and they're going to get the rescue assistance that they need. Well, very good. Dave, I think at this point I'm going to flip it back to you. I think we're at our Q&A point of our presentation, and I hope, so I'll flip it back to you, Dave.
Okay, great. Thanks, Larry. Some good information there. And yeah, we do have a few questions here from the audience, and we do have a little bit of time here for Larry to address them. The first one is from Usuri, and he or she is asking, are there any specific concerns or regulations governing fire safety at healthcare facilities, and specifically looking at like medical gases that are used in operating rooms and such?
Yeah, absolutely. So our medical facilities are probably the most regulated, as they should be. Medical facilities really start with NFPA 101. That's our life safety code. It gives a huge amount of information for both new and existing healthcare facilities of various types. NFPA 99 is going to give you a wealth of information on medical gas, and all the related components when it comes to healthcare and life safety and healthcare institutions. So really, I would focus on 101 and 99. You can also get feedback and information from the Joint Commission. The Joint Commission is the organization tasked with inspecting healthcare facilities that receive federal funding, Medicare, Medicaid funding. Though they are doing constant inspections in all healthcare facilities. They have a litany of requirements. So our healthcare facilities, the good side, they're some of the safest occupancies we have. The more difficult side is they are also have the most stringent requirements when it comes to life safety. It's get some help, I would say. And there are a lot of consultants out there that just specialize on the healthcare market because of those requirements. So great question, though.
Adam was wondering about appliances in classrooms, I assume K through 12 classrooms, like microwaves, toaster ovens, coffee makers, maybe space heaters, things like that. Any kind of standards or codes that they should be adhering to?
Well, most of those items that you just noted are electric based. So electric based don't have some of those carbon monoxide errors, dangers, if that was the nature of their question. On the carbon monoxide front, it's anything that's burning a fossil fuel, so natural gas, coal, a fireplace, anything that has the ability to have an improper combustion of a fossil fuel. So a fossil fuel burning appliance like a natural gas water heater, a stove, an HVAC unit that has heating elements, even things like propane buffers and scrubbers and carpet cleaning equipment. Anything using a fossil fuel burning equipment, gasoline, propane, anything like that. Those are the dangers. And again, whether that's permanently installed, like with an HVAC unit, or a movable piece of equipment, like a Zamboni and an ice skating rink, or again a propane powered piece of equipment like a vacuum cleaner or a buffer or carpet cleaning equipment. So sometimes we don't think about that non-permanently installed, but they do have dangers associated with carbon monoxide.
Rick was wondering about solenoid coil keepers and if they are required on older systems, and if so, do you need to upgrade one of those systems?
That's a great question. So the requirement for the coil keeper or the solenoid monitoring, it went effective January 1st, 2021, and it comes from NFPA 13 is where the requirement comes from. It is not a retroactive requirement. And I would say, unfortunately, because I think these are really, really critical items. So it is not retroactive, but if you've installed a solenoid after January 1st, 2021, it is a required item. Now, I will say it is very, very common and almost universal that when you go in, when a fire inspector goes in to test a pre-action system, they remove that solenoid so you don't inadvertently trip the valve, and you test that solenoid's operation independently with it not on the valve. And so putting that back on at the conclusion of the test is so critical. And that's really why that device was created. I think it's a great item to retrofit back to your systems for your own safety. I think most insurance companies, if they knew that's how you do the test and it could be left off, I think most insurance companies would require it. But as far as I know, it's not a retroactive agreement. It only applies to new solenoids installed after January 1st, 2021.
Okay. Yeah, we have a few minutes here for a couple more, and we're getting some good questions in here. Austin wanted to know of any informative resources that you would recommend to best keep track of some of the things you discussed today, like new equipment and system technologies.
Yeah, I mean, the first place I would point to is NFPA itself. So NFPA, their website, nfpa.org, has a wealth of information. They often highlight new codes and standards. The Fire Protection Research Foundation is an offshoot of NFPA itself. They are often showing you what they're researching, new technologies, new things that they're researching. So those are two resources that you can look at. NFPA now has something called NFPA Link, which is an electronic connection to all of their codes and standards. Very, very good resource with a lot of enhanced content. So that can be a good way. And then I would stay close to trade associations, the Automatic Fire Alarm Association, the Center for Campus Fire Safety, even NFMT. NFMT and FacilitiesNet has tried to do a good amount through their magazine, through the annual conference of NFMT in Baltimore every year in the spring, and their NFPA or NFMT Remix conferences in the fall. So that's been a good way to do it, and a kind of a shameless plug for, I think, the FM Prime program that has a lot of life safety fire alarm related content on it now as well. So some good resources out there. Hopefully that will give you some places you can look.
Sure. Yeah, and I know fire as just an aside, Larry, as Larry mentioned, fire life safety is one of our more popular topics on the website. So yeah, you can definitely find a lot of information there on FacilitiesNet. Have time for one more question here, Larry, and this comes from Terry. So we have a number of other questions here. Sorry, we can't get to them, but if you have a modern fire system, what types of things are needed to kind of get a building a new building up to new code? And how do we know we are not into a new code situation?
Well, it really starts with the research for your local jurisdiction. So if you're building a new building, or maybe it's time to upgrade your existing system, codes change, adoptions of codes change. So really start with your local HA. Have a conversation. You can have a conversation with your local fire marshal. They're very nice people. They will be open to a conversation, especially if it's in your interest to want to do what's right. They'll tell you some of the codes and standards that you should be aware of. So do that research up front, see what kind of codes and standards. And then really, I certainly encourage you to reach out to a licensed fire protection engineer. They can give you kind of that neutral opinion about some of the technologies. You can express to them the things that you're interested in. Maybe you like a certain technology. Maybe you're looking for a certain kind of solution when it comes to your system. They can help you vet that and say, okay, well, maybe these manufacturers can provide that, and they can help guide you through that process. New code situations can be tricky. There's a lot of unique items that are kind of stuck into code that hopefully a good fire protection engineer is aware of. But really having that open dialogue both with your local fire marshal, a good fire protection engineer, really trying to meet the codes in the best possible way, knowing that'll have the best outcome for your occupants.
Okay. Yeah, we've reached an hour mark here. Just to wrap things up, I guess, before we say our final goodbyes. Any last thoughts, Larry, that you wanted to pass along to the audience?
I would really, just as a point of advice, take stock of your building. Maybe if you have a little bit of downtime, facility managers normally don't, but I always encourage, if you've got, 2 or 3 hours, take stock of the life safety equipment that you have. Make sure you understand what you have in your building. Make sure you've hired good quality inspection companies that are providing good quality inspections. You want to get that lifespan out of your system. So that really starts with people who are inspecting, testing, and maintaining your system. So really vet those individuals and spend some time making sure you know what you have so that you can plan adequately for the future.
Great. And again, once again, Larry, thanks for this great presentation today. Lots of really good information. I think hopefully everybody can take back to their offices. So, and thanks everyone for attending our event today. And just one final reminder, this event was recorded and will be archived on facilitiesnet.com. And if you'd like to get a CEU for attending today's event, please watch for your email for our link to take our CEU quiz. Once again, we appreciate everyone being here today, and this will conclude our webcast.